the church has never been perfect. Like when in history has a church ever had it together?
No.
Like we are a hot mess all the time.
Always have been. Yeah.
Yeah. And the hope is that God promised that his Holy Spirit would be with us.
Hey everybody, welcome to Catholics in Ordinary Time. We have a great episode for you today. Maddie Dobrowski, who is a very interesting young adult Catholic woman, married, teaches in a Chesterton Academy, was homeschooled, and a huge, this may not surprise you, Lord of the Rings fan. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation with Maddie Dobrowski. So
Yeah.
thank you for
Nice.
taking the time.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, the topic has been kind of like young adults in their practice of Catholicism, their Catholic faith. So I've been trying to do a range of people, folks that were baptized Catholic and just kind of continued Catholic, some that continued and stopped for whatever reason, continued, stopped, recontinued, a whole range of things, right? Because I'm just really curious about it. And we said we wanted to be a synodal listening church. So why don't we start listening? So I thought, well, how do we open spaces for the Spirit to actually, for us to listen to the Spirit that's working in the church? Because it's not as though the Spirit is done with the church. So how do we listen to it? So this is one of those opportunities. So the questions are going to be pretty much about how your practice is, kind of like where you started, where you are now, that sort of thing.
Okay. All right.
Great. So I know a little bit about your story, but why don't you just kind of tell how you got to where you are at the moment, just like born, raised, school, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So born and raised Catholic, cradle Catholic in a large homeschooling Catholic family in the Midwest. So I'm sure there are a lot of stereotypes that go along with that. Some true, some not true. But my parents both had pretty sincere, authentic conversions in their young adult years. My mom through University of Steubenville, and then my dad kind of with her, although he wasn't attending the university. And then they both ended up as a young married couple at a very Orthodox but very charismatic Catholic church in the Midwest, in the Grand Rapids area, St. Francis Xavier. I'm not sure if the culture there at the church parish is still what it was when they were there, but it was a wonderful place for their faith to blossom, and they were just set on fire with love for the Lord in a way that they hadn't experienced growing up as Catholics. And so I feel like their story is really important because it's the seed of our story and my faith journey, because that's where it all started, was in the home. So they were just so on fire. We would have they really wanted to incorporate their conversion experience and their experience of the Holy Spirit and God's love for us into our family life. And so that led them to make some pretty radical decisions as far as, like choosing to homeschool us, which at the time, now many more people are doing that.
Right.
It's still seen as a little weird probably by the general, world, but now it's more accepted in Christian communities. I think back then it was still pretty taboo, even among Christians and Catholics. It's like, oh, you're homeschooling, so can your kids read? And no one around them was really doing it. So they made that decision, but I think that really set the foundation for our formation as Catholics growing up, and for my formation, because it wasn't just sit down and do your prayers. It was all from the standpoint of relationship with my parents, relationship with our church community. They were very involved there. My dad was a youth minister for many years. And then also relationship with the Lord, and actually modeling for us and then inviting us, even as little kids. I remember being as young as 4 years old and knowing what it was like to feel God's presence in prayer, which I think is a total blessing that not many young kids get to experience. So that was kind of early years. We moved to Boise.
Why?
Oh, yeah.
Just a question about the homeschooling. Was your parents' choice to have you all homeschooled? Why? How was that connected to being Catholic?
I think for them, it was just, they came to this point where they had experienced God in such a radical way in their lives personally that they wanted to do whatever he said, regardless of what it was. And so it wasn't a matter of oh, we're Catholics, so we need to homeschool because that's what a good Catholic should do. It was more a matter of, we've given our lives to the Lord, and we're asking him now what he wants for our family, instead of it just being, okay, God, here's our plan. Now you bless it. And I think that attitude, that disposition, of discerning everything led them to the decision to homeschool, because they felt like that's where they could have the most impact on their kids' upbringing in the faith, and their personal formation and family culture. So yeah, I was, I think, really born out of just their radical surrender to God.
Mm.
I think also, like, along with that was their decision to be really, in a radical way, open to life and just say, okay, God, like, how many kids do you want us to have? Things like that. So I think it was all part and parcel just with the conversion they were experiencing. More so that than it was them saying, "Oh, we're Catholics, so we should do this
Mm.
because it's the best thing for everyone." It was more, "This is what the Lord's calling us to do, and maybe it's scary because 'cause we've never done that before." Neither of them were homeschooled, didn't come from that background at all,
Yeah.
but just felt like that's what God put on their hearts, so they went for it.
Yeah, because I was talking to a young couple that have 3 little kids that and they're choosing to homeschool out in Spokane Valley. Neither of them are homeschooled. I'm not quite clear because I'm still understanding what they're doing, but that some of it is captured in kind of a seemingly, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but kind of a withdrawal from the culture or not trusting their kids with a culture that they don't agree with. And so it was kind of this separatist or separating sort of notion. Was that an element of it as well, or?
Yes, in the sense that they knew that when you put your kid into school, especially, well, I think it happens at a pretty early age. What you're doing is you're kind of trading a lot of your influence and time with them
Mhm.
for whatever the influence happens to be of the
Yeah.
peers that they're with. And so if you don't have school options where you can be sure that that influence is going to be in line with what you want, then that's a pretty big risk. So I think there was an element of that, because at the time there just weren't any schools that my parents trusted
Mm.
to, in our area, to, adhere to the values they wanted us to be raised in. And then along with that, just the mindset that parents are the first educators of their
Mhm.
children, whether you're homeschooling them or have them in school, that's still true. And so I think both of those things together just convicted them that this was the correct route for now. Now I think there are Catholic schools are kind of seeing a revival in the spirituality side of things, and so many more parents are opting for like a private school option,
Mm.
with the same, I think, for the same reasons that parents opt for homeschooling, that they don't want to, they don't want to surrender their influence in their children's life at such an early age,
Yeah.
unless they can trust it.
No, and that makes sense. That makes sense. And I know, honestly, some of my siblings' case and some of now my nephews and nieces, is that they just really love being around their kids.
That too.
Period. They're like, "Oh wait, why would I send him away all week long? I want him with
Yeah,
me." So yeah.
I think there's that as well. Yeah, there's a lot of conversations that can be had about, like, the social development needs of, like, do kids really need to be around their peers,
Mm.
from, like, 8 to 3 when they're, 4 years old? And just looking at, like, and that's each parent's discernment,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that is a
Certainly.
factor too, I think.
Yeah. So how many kids did your parents have?
And I always have to pause and count because there are a lot of us. 7.
So 7 in
Actually.
total is what God wanted y'all to have. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
turns out.
That's good. And you're second to the oldest, as I recall. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have an older brother who's we're all pretty close in age, so he's a year and a half older.
Nice. So you were there in the Midwest, and then you moved west.
Yes, yeah, so senior year, right before senior year of high school, we moved out to Boise, which is where you met our family,
I
in
did.
Boise.
I was lucky enough.
Yeah.
That has got to be a hard time to move for you.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think there was, looking back on it now, I think there was a lot of grace that I was just not even aware of, at the moment being a teenager, because while it was really difficult, I also remember feeling totally peaceful about it, and, I'm also, like, a very practical person, so I think that was kind of on my side where I remember saying to myself, like, "If it sucks, it's just 1 year and then I go to college, which I was gonna do anyway, so
Move on.
exactly, yeah, so it was a fun adventure, and we were going I think this was another benefit of us having been homeschooled, is we had such close relationships as siblings
Mm,
that moving across the country with, like, nobody would have been really hard, but moving across the country with 6 of your best friends is not as bad. Of course, we were leaving behind other best friends in our community there, but we also still had that core unit of our family,
mm,
and we're all very close, so it made it much more doable. So,
yeah,
yeah, it was not as, much of an upheaval as it would sound like
yeah.
for us, at least.
What
But
was what was the prayer practice or yeah, prayer practice in your home growing up? Was there a pretty developed one in addition
yeah.
to mass and those kind of normal things?
From what I can remember, I remember doing the rosary as a family, but it wasn't like a daily thing. It was more like maybe once a week or but it was there. Monthly confession, we definitely went to confession as a family every month. And then I know that my parents had strong individual prayer lives, and I think that kind of set the foundation like, it just set an example for us. Like, in
Mhm.
so many ways, kids, like, like, they don't do what you say, they do what you do.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, just seeing our parents have a prayer life, I think there was just this subconscious idea of like, "Oh, that's what you do," is, like, you have a personal relationship with God. That's what it means to be in the church, to be a Christian, to be Catholic. And so, yes, there was mass and all that, but at home, there was just this standard of, like, having personal prayer time, and then another big thing for us is that we were involved in our church community, and so we would have these, worship nights at our home where we'd have people over,
Okay,
and
it
my
just
dad
got weird. It just got weird.
I know.
You should have warned me just a little.
We were the charismatics, still are. And so they would have people over and just do my dad was in a praise and worship band because he was doing youth ministry and stuff, and we would just, like, have praise and worship nights, and it was I remember those being really impactful for my faith
Mm,
personally. That's through praise and worship music, that's where I really first encountered the Lord in a personal way that I was aware of. Obviously, I was seeing him at mass every week, but I didn't always know I was seeing him.
sure.
Um, so, yeah, I think those are kind of the main pieces was, like, just my parents' own personal prayer life and how that affected our mindset as kids and about a relationship with Jesus and what it looks like, and then also the way that they incorporated, like, group prayer in our home, whether it was just with our family or with other people that
Mm,
we were
mhm.
inviting in.
And your parents would say they would talk about the personal prayer, or they would like, the door's closed, leave me alone. I'm in here praying.
Both, like,
Oh,
they were
okay.
not I mean, when they had their personal prayer time, it was like it's their personal prayer time. Like, we would have my mom now that I'm an adult, I realize this was probably mostly for her sake, not ours, but, we would have a quiet reading time every day. So, we'd have 1 hour where we could not talk to anyone in the house, and we had unless it was an emergency, we had to be, alone, somewhere quiet, reading or doing something that made no noise.
This is for your own good,
Yes,
so that I don't
exactly.
throttle you.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and she said that she would sometimes usually nap for part of that time,
Sure.
but then also that's when she would have her personal prayer time, and so we were not allowed to bother each other or her during that time, and it was just kind of a standard practice. I mean, obviously things would happen and that would get interrupted at times, but that was like the goal that we were always the standard we always had, and so in that way, it was closed door. Like, it wasn't like we were
Mm-mm.
just pulling on her arms while she's trying to do a rosary or whatever, but then on the other hand, they were very open about talking about their faith. Like, they were always discerning family decisions, and it was always like they would just speak very openly about it. And so we as kids were always hearing that kind of language of like, "Oh, yeah, well, we feel like God is telling us to do this." Or they were also very open about their decisions just in the as parents in the way they raised us. Like, it wasn't like, "Here's the rule, too bad, follow it." Like, as we grew up, there was more of a conversation surrounding it of like, well, like, here's why it makes sense. And with my dad particularly being a youth minister, he had a lot of, helpful, like, apologetics
Mm.
behind like, in his belt that I really appreciate he would just kinda share with us things, um, which at the time I was like, whatever." But, like, as I got into college and after, I realized it really set me up with a strong foundation of knowledge of
Mm,
just, like, scripture and church teaching and,
mhm.
like, the common sense of it all.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think that's kind of the way they approached it.
right. So you moved to Idaho, and then you went to Boise State. And did you right off study philosophy, or did you do philosophy?
I did, but I actually I so yeah, I went to Carroll College first for 2 years.
Oh, right, got it.
And that's where I feel like my personal relationship with God really became my own. It's also where I became interested in studying philosophy. And then so by the time I got to Boise State in my junior year, I was hoping to study theology, but Boise State, obviously being a state school, didn't have like a specifically Christian theology program.
Mhm.
So I went with philosophy instead, which ended up being totally the right choice for me.
Sure. No, that's great. That idea of having the philosophy first. I mean, that's what we do in studying for ordination as well.
Yeah.
They've studied a
Mhm.
lot of philosophy before they walk into theology. No,
Mhm.
that's smart. And so you did that. You met your husband. You guys got married. And what do you do now?
Well, now we're in Spokane, as you know, which we never thought we'd be here, so that's funny. I've le I'm starting to realize that, like, we should just not really make plans for life.
That's just
Because
ridiculous. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, when you're living with the Lord, you never know what's coming next.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're in Spokane now. Matt is working as a nurse at Sacred Heart Hospital here, and I am working as a classical educator. So I'm working at the Chesterton High School here, which I never thought I'd be teaching. So we both kind of ended up in areas that we weren't planning on being
Mm.
in, but just happened to be where God led us. And yeah, that's kind of what we're up to now.
Yeah. How do you like teaching?
I love it. Like I said, I didn't plan on being a teacher, but it's really I'm very blessed to be in a school that takes the faith side just as seriously as they do the academics and all that stuff. And so it's really beautiful. Like I'm teaching a philosophy class to freshmen, and it's just super fun. Like, we're talking about St. Thomas Aquinas and Plato and just watching them experience and have their eyes open to all the things that impacted me so much when I first encountered philosophy, and just the way that that lends itself to conversations about the faith is really beautiful, and so it feels like a ministry. It is a ministry in a way, and so I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, that's great. That's good to hear. Did you ever go through a period where you thought, I don't know, this whole Catholicism thing, Christianity, whatever, I'm not doing it? Did you go through a period like that in your life?
Well, I'm not like one of those super interesting people that like went off and did all this stuff and then came back as the prodigal daughter. Um,
You're
so I've
always the
had
older sibling.
always it's the older sibling complex.
Yeah.
Like someone's got to stay faithful.
Thanks for
No.
nothing.
No, but I definitely so no, I never walked away from the faith, like, clearly. I've never and this is totally the grace of God, this is not me at all, but I've never had a time where I've doubted that it's the Catholic Church that's the
Hmm.
true church. But I've definitely gone through periods of, like, serious trial in my relationship with the Lord, where even though I've told him, like, "I'm never gonna leave you," that decision to never leave him has become incredibly difficult to the point where I'm like, I don't know how I can do this anymore. But
What
I'm
is this in that sentence?
just the faith, the not the church teachings necessarily, but just this having a relationship with God and trusting that he's good despite what happens to you and all those sorts of things. I think when real life happens, those decisions, those commitments to be in relationship with God and trust him with your life, they become really difficult.
Mm,
And I've realized in myself that there are just always so many layers to where I might think I'm trusting him,
mm,
and then
mhm.
something happens, I'm like, "Oh my gosh." I'm still totally driving the car, and I
Yeah.
still totally have my hands on the wheel in this way. So, in that sense, I've definitely gone through moments of struggle with my relationship with him. But yeah, it hasn't been it hasn't been to the point where it hasn't been ever an issue with the church or the church teachings necessarily, and I know that some people have that experience, and that's totally valid.
Mhm.
It's not what mine has been. I
Yeah.
think it's 'cause I happened upon this is why I say it's the grace of God. I happened upon some really great books that I read in my college years that just, like, set me on fire for the truth of the faith, so before I even had a chance to question it, it was like God kinda put
Mm.
them in my lap, and one was Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, another one was, Rome Sweet Home
By
by
Scott
Scott,
Hahn. Yeah.
and I think his other book is Reasons to Believe, I think. I read that one as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Um, but those were like I was like, "Whoa," like, I didn't even realize that we had all this evidence behind the church. So it was
Mhm.
before I even, like I said, hit a crisis moment where I needed that, but God kinda gave it to me before, and I think it was kind of my stay throughout troubles.
Oh, that's really good to hear. Because I've tried to read Mere Christianity. I even tried, like, in the last probably month, because I came upon a volume in our library of C.S. Lewis, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, Mere Christianity." And I thought, and as I read it, I'm just like, I appreciate his style, and I appreciate what he's saying, but maybe I'm too far down the road because I'm like, "Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, that makes sense."
Yeah,
Because
and see, when I read it, I had never thought of this stuff before.
right.
I had just taken it all for granted.
I
So then I
don't
was
think
like,
I had those
"Whoa."
questions. I don't think I was carrying
Yeah.
questions that it was answering. Yeah. So,
Mhm.
at a different time. Was there, and we can, if the answer is no, we can just, take this out of the questions. But is there a particular moment where you, to an actual example of your uh, lack of trust in God's plan, or you think this is hard, that you
Yeah,
want to share or not?
yeah, absolutely. And it depends how vulnerable you want me to get, but, I'm happy to just share the
I
most
want
recent.
you as vulnerable as possible. As long as you
Okay,
have
good.
Kleenex standing by on your side.
Okay.
I don't cry easy. Okay, that's a lie. But
Yeah, so, this is, like, the most recent example, and I think the most poignant example of it in my life is that so Matt and I were married in, 2018
Hmm.
and or 2019. Uh-oh.
You
You
know,
know why I always forget? Listen, I have an excuse.
you don't care. That's what your excuse
Because we were married in 2018 or 19, and then it was on the 18th or 19th, and so I always get the year confused with the date. Matt never has that problem, it's always me. But anyways, so we were married 7 years ago, we'll just say that.
Sure.
So whatever that was.
Yeah.
And we wanted to have children right away, like, that was we prayed about it, we were both in, like, a weird financial place, but we really felt like God was putting it on our hearts to just trust Him, and so we were like, "Okay, like, yes, Lord, we're gonna be open and whatever you want," and, of course, in our minds, we were like, "And that means we're gonna have a baby." And then we get married and, a year passes and no pregnancy, another year, no
Mm,
pregnancy, and, we still, to this point, 7 years in, have not been able to have children, and
mm,
that has been, for me, the hardest thing in my relationship with the Lord. Not because not because I think he's no longer good, but just because when you face suffering over and over again with no answer as to, like, why it's not being relieved, and it's just, like, it's not ending even when you think, "Okay, I think I've learned the lesson here," and then, the lesson that God wanted to teach me through this, and then it doesn't end and it keeps going for years. Um, that's when I think trusting in the Lord
mm,
becomes very difficult, because there's only so much you can do of your own human will to say, "I trust you." Like, there's a certain point where you break, and the beautiful thing is God's on the other side of that waiting to catch you, and the whole point is that you didn't have to do it on your own.
mhm.
Even the trusting, you didn't have to be strong enough to
Yeah.
trust on your own strength. Um, but in the moment, that's, like, incredibly, incredibly difficult. So, that has been for me the hardest, I think, breaking point in my relationship with God, where I've really asked some serious questions about, like, "Do you love me as much as these people? Do you
Mm,
really want, certain things for me? Or what like, what does it mean to give your life to God's will? Does it mean you're just gonna be sad forever? And actually having to ask those tough questions without being on the other side yet and still being in the thick of the suffering. So yeah, that has been
Mhm,
probably the most
mhm.
difficult point of trust in my relationship with him.
Yeah, that's very clear about what it is you want, how you feel called, and yet it's obviously a different path that's opening or one that isn't opened yet. It's hard.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah, and
Where do you find support for for your life in general in your parish community through this kind of situation or in general?
That's a difficult question to answer because I do think that infertility is kind of an unseen cross that not many people speak about. And so, as far as support in the parish or in the Catholic community, there really isn't much
Mm,
that I've found other than like, resources online. Like if there are some groups or some even just like pages or blogs that people have started that address this as a ministry, but locally, I haven't really seen much, and I do think it's difficult for couples struggling with this cross to find support specifically geared toward this. So, I mean, there hasn't been no support. I've joined, like, when I was living in Post Falls, Idaho, I joined a Bible study at St. Pius Parish, and that was a beautiful group of women who's doing the Walking with Purpose Bible
mhm,
study. Over there, they have a really, or they did when I was there at least, have a really strong, big group of ladies going through it, and that group was a really beautiful gift from God, like, just a place for me to speak about things. Obviously, it wasn't specifically for infertility, but it was the kind of place where people could just share what they were going through. So that was a grace, and I think groups like that are really, really helpful for
mm,
women and men who are struggling with this, but nothing specifically for
interesting.
infertility, and I think that's something we could probably work on as a church.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. To kind of back up, some kind of more a more general question about how did you moved to the South Hill 2 years ago, and did you look for a parish at that point? How do you find a parish? How do you find a parish?
Well, it's funny because we didn't do the whole parish shopping thing where you go around and taste every flavor and then decide what you want. We Before we had moved, we visited a parish here on the South Hill, and Matt had this sense in prayer that God told him that that was gonna be our parish, which is funny because we weren't planning on moving to Spokane.
Oddly.
But yeah, but we were experiencing some difficulties in the parish that we were attending currently, and we were just feeling like it wasn't the right place for our faith to blossom really anymore, and nothing against the people there. It was just like a different than what we felt like would speak to where we were at that moment in our faith journey. But we came to this church on South Hill, this tiny little church, St. Peter's Parish. Heard of it? Probably haven't, it's little. But okay, you have. But yeah, Matt just felt like, "Oh, this is where we're supposed to be," and then eventually we moved here and it ends up that it's, like, 4 minutes away from our house, just, like, 3 blocks away, and so that was not our plan, that was God's plan, but that's how we ended up at St. Peter's, and it's been really great. The people there, it feels like just, one of your classic small family-centered parishes where people actually know each other's names. There's nothing crazy going on there as far as, I mean, like, it's not like an up and coming booming parish as far as evangelization efforts, but there were just really good people there.
Mhm,
So, we've
mhm.
been enjoying it.
What makes an attractive parish for you?
Well, there's the ideal, and then there's what it actually is, but ideally, I mean, and I haven't seen a parish like this in this area, but ideally, I think a parish where they understand that the church's call is to evangelize, and they've also embraced the new evangelization and aren't saying, "Well, the church is back here, and in order to like, you guys need to get on board basically with where the church is," and the church is kind of this, like, museum
Mm,
artifact that's preserved in time, and, like, you need to teach yourself how to appreciate it, and you're the problem if you don't.
mm,
But more a parish that is obviously faithful to church teaching, that's a big one, but then also understands that embracing the new evangelization is where the Holy Spirit has guided the church. And so if we're not living that actively as a parish community, then we're not then where we're going is different than where the Holy Spirit told us to go as a whole church. So, obviously, that can play out that's pretty vague, but it can play out in a variety of ways depending on the culture of your parish. But I just think, like, an effort to evangelize through relationships, um, I would love to go to a parish where there's, like, beautiful, music, like, where that leads you into an encounter with the Lord in the mass.
Mhm.
That's not really something that we've seen anywhere up here, and that's not like a criticism, but it's just,
So, yeah.
I think it's the PNW is kind of fringe. We're kind of in a little corner up here in the US, and, so we have, one way of doing things that's beautiful, but we haven't seen like, in Boise, there was more, like, praise and worship and mass and stuff. I mean, that was kinda more accepted as, like, normal and okay and good.
Mhm, and
You don't
supported.
really
Yeah.
yeah, you don't really see that up here. I mean, there are other beautiful things up here, but yeah, so that I would love to see that and just to focus on relationships and evangelization in a parish.
Okay. Because sometimes people pick, for the music or the preaching or the hospitality, and I like that other category too of like, is it evangelizing or not? And then
Mhm.
there's the ideal, and then there's the parish that's 4 minutes away. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's nothing against the parishes up here. Like I said, there's what you want, and then there's where you're called to be. And obviously,
Hmm.
where we're called to be is here, and our parish is beautiful and wonderful, and we love it. But yeah, just I'm thinking of obviously the ideal form, as Plato would say,
Yeah.
of a
Correct.
parish.
Our Lady of the Ideal Form. Welcome.
Yes.
Oh, you're not allowed. You're not ideal enough. Sorry.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, that's problematic. How are you involved with the parish?
Matt and I and you know this because we were at the Newman Center with you, but we both have a love for music and helping people encounter Jesus through music. And so we've started with the help of our parish priest, a praise and worship holy hour that happens we try to make it happen monthly. And it's just adoration. We bring in some guest priests for confession, so there are multiple priests available, and then it's praise and worship music with Jesus and the monstrance, and that has been really awesome. It's been really beautiful because, like I said, there's not much of that going on
Mhm.
here in this area in Spokane, and so to see people encounter it for the first time, like, we thought it would draw a ton of young people, and there have been some young people coming, but it's also drawn a lot of the older generation at the parish, and to see their encounter with Jesus in that way
Mm.
has been really beautiful. Like, Father has received a lot of feedback just on, like, how impactful having that kind of an experience has been for people at the parish.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's been really awesome to see. I think we have between, like, 40 and 50 people come each time we do it. I
That's
mean, we're
terrific.
hoping to, like, keep inviting people in just the Spokane area to come.
Mhm. Yeah. So you show up to mass, you do this music ministry kind of generously on the side, kind of
Mhm.
making yourself available. How else do you get involved as a young couple?
Well, we aren't involved in any of the other ministries currently, and part of that is just because of schedule stuff. Like, I'm finishing up my grad school degree while teaching, so
Mm-hmm.
we've, like, been asked to be involved in, like, the youth ministry or in, like, Bible studies, and we really want to, but it's kind of in this weird season where those things are a little on hold while we finish up some of these other things we're doing. So right now it's really just that holy hour of praise and worship that we're, like, actively involved
Mm-hmm.
in, and then outside of that, it's really just going to mass and then trying to get to know the people in the pews around us. So, like, going to coffee and donuts or whatever, and just trying to meet people, like, if there's, new people at the parish or people we haven't seen
Mm-hmm.
before. So kind of more in that, I guess, behind the scenes sort of way of just trying to get to know people.
Yeah. And is it the kind of parish that you and Matt are paraded around as? Look, there's young people, or are there are there others like yourself?
There are a lot of young people. I would say it's a mix because St. Peter's is attached to All Saints School. They're on
Mm,
the same
mhm,
property. So a lot of the school families attend mass there. And it's a elementary school slash middle school. So there are quite a few, I wouldn't say young people quite at our age, like in the 20 to 30 age range, but like 30 to 40 with young
mm,
kids is
mhm.
kind of pretty common.
Yeah.
So it's not like we show up and everyone's looking at us like we're, some strange creature out of the bush. Like,
Yeah.
what is this? A young person.
It's a young person.
Yeah.
What about how do you guys manage and navigate tithing in support of a church like that?
We do 10%,
Just straight up.
just straight up. Yeah.
Another boring answer.
I
Uh,
know.
so,
I
uh,
know. It's
and
because I wouldn't be able to keep track of it.
and you guys just that's what you've always done, and that's what you do. Okay.
Yeah, it is. That's something that, so growing up, my dad working in ministry, money was tight a lot of the
Hmm.
times, and for a while, they didn't tithe full. I'm sharing their personal story, so hopefully they're okay with this, but they would probably tell it to you as well. For a while, they discerned that with the help of a priest, like, to tithe, like, part of that 10% just because of their financial
Hmm.
situation, and then they felt like the Lord put it on their heart at a certain point to just trust him financially and do the full 10%. So they did, and they really experienced a lot of blessings in that of his care and provision for them. So I remember being a young kid and having them like have those conversations and like share with us how being generous to God, like God is never outdone in
Hmm.
generosity. And so Matt and I kind of took that mindset into our tithing philosophy, and we haven't thought too much about it. There have definitely been times where the 10% is really tough,
Yeah.
um, but we've just kinda stuck with it because we built the habit, and
Mm-hmm.
God has never been outdone in generosity, so he's always taken care of us, and so we've just stuck with the 10%, and then, we have some other there are some other ministries that we give to, out of that 10%, like, if I remember correctly, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, it's like 10% overall, but 5% for sure to your parish. Is that right?
I don't know that calculus that in that much.
Oh,
I've never heard it described in that much detail. I've just
oh, okay.
heard it described as moving towards 10%, and then
Oh, okay.
move as much as you like. But that's I've always seen it as a guideline to help people start that conversation and move towards something.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so we do, like, a baseline of 5% always to the parish, and then it can be up to 10% depending on, like, if we have another ministry that we
Hmm.
do or don't give to that month, so
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I love that whole topic just because money is so central to kind of how we navigate as Americans. I'll just say that.
Mhm.
And so all kinds of things get reflected in that. I just find that always very interesting.
Yeah, I actually remember going on the senior retreat at Boise State that you and Father Radmar put on, and I loved that retreat so much because I felt like all of the conversations were geared towards how are you gonna be a Catholic outside of college, and
Hmm.
that was so helpful, and one of the things we talked about was tithing, and I don't know if you remember that, but we had a whole discussion on it, and it was just so interesting to hear everyone's opinions on, and like you said, many things get reflected when you start talking about giving money that, maybe you don't get to choose how it's used.
Oh,
Maybe you don't
right.
like how it's being used or whatever. It's just very interesting. So, thank you for making us have that conversation because that was a really helpful thing to think about as we went into our young adult years.
Oh, well, it's so gratifying to hear. Because I've continued to have these conversations, with people, but generally with young adults. Sometimes in my own family, and some of the responses are like why people give, why they don't, are along those
Mhm.
lines. But also, just like I have one nephew who I was like, so why don't you go on direct deposit, like just automatic, withdrawal? And he goes, well, because then it wouldn't feel right to not make the choice every time to give.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, I've never thought of that.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
because I would just think, like, set it, forget it, and move on, if you
Yeah.
could. But anyway, so there's always a wide range of
Yeah.
of
That is really interesting.
crazy things.
'Cause you do have to it's a decision when you write that check and you're like, "Hmm,
Yes, a
okay."
decision to find a checkbook. Where
Yeah.
where would that
Where are
I
those? Do they
never
look like
use that.
this?
Yeah. Oh, here it is. So a couple questions about you. write for Substack. Well, you write a newsletter and it's on Substack, more to the point.
Mhm.
Tell me, how is it being Catholic on Substack?
Yeah, I have found Substack to be such a great place for Catholics because people on Substack in general, obviously you still have your trolls, but in general, everyone's much more open to people sharing their opinions, ideas, and I think because of the long form writing, that is the main way of
Mhm.
putting your thoughts out on Substack. People are much less likely to have those like knee jerk reactions to what you're saying, and if they comment something that's weird or, off color, then like if they're not if they're not entering into rational discourse, they're going to get called out on it. And so I
Mhm.
feel like being on Substack as a Catholic is a really great way to share the faith, even just subtly. So I have my pages about literature. It's just finding truth, beauty, and goodness in great works of literature. And it's not overtly Catholic. It's not like every post I'm trying to talk about the Catholic Church. I'm just reading books and talking about, themes of virtue and stuff like that. But I've found it to be really, really like there's a really good acceptance of those themes. And so it's really been awesome to write and actually have people from all walks of life find, I think, common ground.
Yeah, I think the work you're doing is great. I really enjoy it. I'm
Well, thank
I'm,
you.
I'm glad to find you there. And you also, speaking of long form, you also wrote a book. Tell me about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And
So
here
that
you are, a
was
young Catholic, and you're writing a book. What the heck?
Yeah, that's what I said. So heck, um, it was kind of born out of just some different things in life that were happening. COVID hit and
Mm,
I was substitute teaching, so my job ended and I was home all the time, which was really a blessing because it caused me to take a look at my own life and ask some questions about my relationship with God that I hadn't wanted to ask before that. So it was this time of really like kind of intense personal conversion and revival in my life. And also I had a ton of time on my hands. And so
right.
from that, I felt like the Lord put it on my heart to start exploring and developing other parts of my personhood and to ask questions about like, okay, like going back to the topic of infertility, like you're waiting for children, but like you have all these other beautiful things in your life that you love to do. Like, don't let that misery consume you to the point where you're not doing anything else.
Mm,
And
mhm,
just he asked me to invest in these other areas. And so I didn't go, okay, well then I'll write a book. But it was something that I'd wanted to do for a long time was to write a series of essays on the Catholic themes in the Lord of the Rings trilogy because those books had just I loved them so much. When I read them, it was just like so rich and beautiful of an experience. So I set out to write the essays, and as I wrote them, I just found that I had so much to say that it kind of just snowballed and then organized itself
mm.
into chapters. And I was like, this looks more like a book than a series of essays. And then partway through that process, I started to wonder if anyone would wanna publish it, and then it just kinda went from there. So that was an awesome experience. Yeah, very fun.
No, that's really cool. Tell me about the experience of working at a fairly new kind of how would you describe the Chesterton? I mean, it's a private school, but it's
Mhm.
also very shaped and informed by the Catholic faith or Christianity in general.
Yeah, it is explicitly a Catholic
Oh, okay, got
school. So I know there are, like, the, Hillsdale schools they're, informed by
it. Mm,
Christianity very
mhm,
heavily, but they don't call themselves explicitly Christian. Um, Chesterton is a network of schools that they do call themselves Catholic specifically. So they are informed by the Catholic faith in an explicit way,
mm,
and that's how they present their curriculum. We do have students who aren't Catholic who come, but it's just they're very open about like, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying to do. And then their whole curriculum is based on the classical idea of education. So teaching students not just things that will help them in future jobs and practical skills in life, but also teaching them knowledge for the sake of knowledge and kind of going back to that idea that like we should educate the entire person. We should educate them spiritually, intellectually and physically, and that all of those are equally important. So, regardless of what you do after your high school education, our hope is that the students walk away with just a well-rounded view of the world and of what it means to be human and what it means to be human in relation to God and in relation to the world.
And so that's the ideal. How's it working out?
I think I stepped into it at a time when when any new school starts up, it's like you have your years of, like, figuring out
Yeah.
what you're doing, and then there are gaps, and you gotta fill them. I feel like I stepped into the school at a time when they have some really awesome people in place who really see how to, take this ideal romantic idea of education and actually make it practically efficient and
Mm,
effective
mhm,
in the kids' lives. And so I'm loving it. I think that's a great team there, and they're doing a really wonderful job of tightening up the education plans so that
mhm.
the kids are coming out of it with a really robust intellectual, but also spiritual formation.
So why don't these families just homeschool their kids?
You'd have to ask them.
But when you look at it, you think, is it just because, there's a lot more resources available in this kind of model than typically any family would have to be able to provide their children?
I think so. I
Yeah,
think that when you get to homeschooling in high school, and I'm all for homeschooling at any age. I think if it's what God's calling your family to do, it's gonna
sure.
work out and it's great. And I think there are a lot of misconceptions about, like, your kid not being ready for the world or not being ready socially, but I think that's only true if you homeschool in a certain way, which most people aren't.
Mhm.
And so I think, though, that the reason people would choose a school like Chesterton over homeschooling, and again, I'm putting words in their mouth, this is just my impression. I think it would be that when you get to the high school age, you're diving into mastery of very complex topics. I mean, think of like high school chemistry or pre-calc classes. Like they can be pretty intense. Like
Mhm.
I I would struggle in a pre-calc class and for high schoolers. I'm not gonna say might. I definitely would.
Me too.
um, but, like, then you think of a parent feeling like they need to make sure their kid learned that well enough at home, and while there are a lot of resources now for high schoolers to be homeschooled, like, and do online courses so the parent doesn't have to teach all of those, I think that parents aren't always super excited about the idea of like, "Okay, so either I have to teach you this or I have to put you on a screen in a room 4 hours a day so you can learn it from someone else, and then is that really healthy for you?"
Yeah,
Um,
right.
like, if you don't have really good social outlets outside of that. And, it's not black and white, it's not like you can't do it in a good, healthy way, but I think I'd imagine that's a lot of the motivation behind why
Mhm.
parents would say, "Well, or we have this private Catholic classical school here that's using the same curriculum I'd want my students to learn at home." It's this A lot of these families who go to Chesterton were homeschooled before, so it's a lot of, like, the same community
Mm,
or
mhm.
people you know from church, people you trust, and it's all very small class sizes. So my classes are no more than 15 kids. And so it's kind of more of a family atmosphere at the school than it is like, you're throwing your kid into a sea of, like, hundreds of teenagers and saying, "Figure it out."
Yeah,
Um, so
yeah,
I would guess that that's a big motivation behind it.
yeah. So a couple questions about the church in general. Like,
Mhm.
do you spend much time getting worked up about where the church is headed, or where we should be headed, or whatever? How do you navigate some of that stuff? Because there's every opportunity, online or in regular conversations, to spend as much time as you like, uh, uh, complaining or
Mhm.
celebrating the state of the church, or how do you where do you come down on all that?
Well, I think part of it depends on what we mean by the state of the church. Like different people mean different things when they
Sure,
complain
certainly.
about the state of the church, right? Like everyone's got their own opinion about like what's even wrong, what problem we even have in the first place that we should be addressing. Like some people are like, well, that is a problem. Other people say, well, I don't think that's a problem. I think that's good.
Yeah.
So personally, I think it's just all division, and I don't think that it's unimportant to have conversations about what the church should be doing, but I also think in this age where everybody has a platform and everybody is a self-appointed armchair theologian expert, it's just, I think, lends to a lot of yapping, as I say to my students. A lot of yapping going on and not a lot of thinking.
Oh my god, you sound like you're in your 80s.
I feel like it sometimes.
You just need a porch, a rocking chair.
Yes. Oh, yes, it's true. Um, so that's I don't know, that's my take, is I think a lot of people like to appoint themselves as experts on a topic, and oftentimes what it leads to is more division, because a
Mhm.
lot of times what their opinion is being informed by is the media outlet that they like because it reinforces their view, and I mean, you could apply this to any controversial debate in the church, whether we're talking about, like, rad trads versus charismatics, whether we're talking about the things Pope Francis said, all like, whatever it is, I think there's so much just, like, we're getting pieces of information, and we're not fully informed or educated on the truth about things, and then we just kinda throw out what we think, and it
Yeah.
leads to arguing, which isn't good for the church.
No,
So,
it's not, and sometimes it seems like some folks, their one goal is to teach you who to hate. Like,
yeah,
wait, I need to be taught who to hate? I think I'm okay. I didn't even know those
yeah,
people existed, and now I hate them.
now
Like,
I realized I should hate
I realize I should be hating more. I just there's not enough hours in the day.
Yeah, but
Um,
there was a time where and everyone has their own little niche that they get that really, like, gets them going, right?
sure.
So, like, for us, for a while, I think it was, like, the conversation about, like, tradition in the liturgy and versus, like, a more, um I don't even know what word I wanna use. I guess you could say the label would be a more charismatic, maybe, expression of worship. But, like, because that was and the reason that was a big deal is because in the North Idaho community, that's a very hot topic. Like,
Mhm, mhm.
and just in the PNW in general, there's a lot of schisms up here, and so I think there's that conversation is really important to people, much more important than it is, like, if you go to the Midwest. Like, when I was growing up in Michigan, never even heard of that conversation, like, it was just, like, people weren't talking about it,
Yeah.
but over here, it's, like, a really big deal. So for a while, that was, like, something that would really kinda, like, irk me, but I don't know, I feel like I've just come to a place where, like, I've prayed enough about it and read enough on my own to feel like I know at least what I think, but I don't think the debate is helpful.
Mm, mhm.
I think 99% of the time the debate is not helping the church, and so
Yeah,
I just try to stay out of it.
yeah. One last question for you is, what gives you hope in the church right now? Is it a good place for young people like yourself? I mean, is there lots of opportunity, or what gives you hope? What are the glimmers give you hope?
I think 2 things come to mind immediately. One is that the the media, and when I say media, I mean, like, any media, like, even if it's, like, Christian media sources or whatever, I think, like, bad news sells, and so you hear a lot more of the bad about the church than you do the good. But if you go to, parishes around the country or whatever, which I'm sure you have because you've traveled a lot for your ministry and vocation, there are a lot of parishes around that are taking seriously the call to evangelize, and there are like, God is still at work, and God has been at work throughout the church despite our failings. So even like, the church has never been perfect. Like,
Mhm.
when in history has a church ever had it together?
No,
Like, we are a hot mess all the
always
time.
have been. Yeah.
Yeah, and the hope is that God promised that his Holy Spirit would be with us and that he would keep his church, and he has, and so people are still having profound encounters with God and coming into the church, into the fullness of his plan for their salvation, and so that's the hope, I think, is, like, no matter how bad things get, and we can always argue about, is it worse now than it was hundreds of years ago, and we probably won't be able to answer it accurately, but the hope is that Jesus is with his church, and he's not gonna just drop us off a cliff even
Mhm.
though we are floundering as we always have just because 'cause we're human,
Yeah.
and so I think that gives me hope, and then anytime I hear of churches or parish communities that are, like, just really leaning into an authentic Holy Spirit-led ministry and mission on earth, that's always a glimmer of hope of like,
Mm,
wow, that's awesome to see, and it's awesome to see the fruit of it.
yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. That's great. Maddie, thank you so much for taking the time. This has
Thank you
been
for having me.
it's so great to see you and hear you and remember how smart and funny you are. I was like, "Oh, yeah, I love that, Maddie."
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to just connect with you again.
Thank you so much for listening to Catholics in Ordinary Time. If you like what you're hearing, please consider subscribing so you don't miss anything in the rest of the season. Also, please recommend this to friends and family. And if you're feeling up to it, please leave us a review. That makes all the difference. Again, thanks so much for listening.